So glad to have you joining us for another episode of Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome in. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
As tends to happen, I was listening to a podcast on the way over here, and
It isn't so.
It's true. I'm only 18 minutes in, but there was such compelling content in those 18 minutes. I just felt like I was going to burst if we didn't talk about it a little bit.
So stop watching this one and go.
No.
Oh, don't do that. Okay.
Finish watching this and then go listen to the podcast that I'm referencing, and maybe we'll finish it at about the same time. But this is part of the series that Brene Brown has been doing about this concept of living beyond human scale. So she's had, I think, 5 or 6 different sessions where she's brought various people in to have interviews around the concepts of AI and all of the things that are creeping into our life that we may not be psychologically, physically, emotionally prepared for. And so that is kind of what she means with the living beyond human scale. She tells a story about how she came to that title and what all that means, but that's not really where I want to go. This particular episode that aired, I think it was in April, is with her guest is by the name of Amy Webb. And so she is a strategic foresight person. Like, this is her role. This is her camp where she hangs out. And I hadn't really heard anything explained like this. She calls herself a futurist, and she even kind of pokes fun at the job title. She says, I hate that job title. It just sounds like something made up. But she says, to be fair, accountants used to be made up job titles. And so I think the way in which we're going, the futurist as a profession is probably going to have more and more clout and importance in our community and in our society. But she shared this little narrative that just really, really caught my attention. And we just talked about it a little bit and thought it was really great food for discussion, food for thought here today. And so here's the line from Amy Webb. So she says that her work is not to be prepared for everything. It is to be prepared for anything. And that distinction is pretty tremendous, and wanted to talk a little bit about what in the world does that mean and how does that play out in real life?
Well, it's funny, and so without the benefit of listening to the rest and hearing her definition, which is sometimes better, we can just riff on this. I think it's interesting, that distinction, because to me what that means is I'm not prepared for everything, which means I have conjured up every single possible outcome and put probabilities on it and said, okay, I need to be prepared in this way for everything that I can imagine. Being prepared for anything, in my mind, is staying open to what's going on and being more like a weaver than an architect. In other words, and this goes to what we've been talking about the last couple of episodes, which is, don't focus so much on the outcome that you don't enjoy the process, or that you don't stay in the process.
Yeah.
Because we can sometimes get so focused on an outcome that we have conjured up. There's a better outcome, and I would say that by definition, this is almost always true. There's a better outcome if we can work with others to get there, and if we can work with other folks' ideas and other ideas, even that we might have by changing our brain around, which we can talk about later. So the point is, if I'm a weaver as opposed to an architect, I'm going to be paying attention as things go along to the environment around me and to the feedback loops of my actions along the way. And so being prepared for anything means, okay, I'm doing this, and this is the result. This is what's going on in the environment. Here's what's going on and changing in the world. And therefore, now I'm going to try this. And it's more of an iterative process with a feedback loop rather than I'm focused on a single outcome and you better not get in my way.
I think about it a little bit differently, and maybe ultimately we're saying the same things, but here's how that plays out in my brain. If I'm preparing for everything, every possible outcome, the burden is on me to come up with solutions for anything that could happen. Any wild card that gets thrown in there, I've got to be ready for it. It is a strategic way of thinking. It is one that requires my resource, my investment of my time, my capital, all of the things to be ready in case any of these things happen.
Right.
But if you're prepared for anything, to me, that's a frame of mind, not an executable task. So in other words, if I've got in the ready for everything category, I might have 15 variables and I have to prepare for all 15. But knowing inevitably the way that the world works, it's really number 16, which is going to happen to you, right? There is no way to be prepared for everything. But if I'm prepared for anything, it's a frame of mind so that when 16 comes along, I'm not thrown off into this place of confusion and sadness and frustration because all of my time and efforts were ill spent.
That's right. No, I think that we're saying the same thing in different language, which is good because, no, it's not good because it is interesting to me with that perspective, because that way you're exactly right. I'm not spending all of my time preparing for these eventualities or these outcomes, which prevents me a couple things. One, it may prevent me from acting. And I need to act. And I need to act in this world as I go. And I need to be nimble. It's like a jet ski. You can't steer it unless you've got the throttle on.
Right.
Because there's no rudder, it's done with the throttle, right? So unless you're in motion, unless you're moving, then you can't steer. The other thing is, if I'm so busy thinking about outcome number 16 as I'm seeing things and going, I'm not going to be disappointed when 16 doesn't happen. B, I'm going to be more accepting that it's 15 and a half or 1 as opposed to 16. I'm going to be more accepting of that and therefore more adaptable to it and seeing the attributes that might be along the same lines and or better than what I was thinking of in my outcome. So to me, I love that phrase. It keeps me open. It keeps me moving and weaving and acting, and yet being accepting of the world doesn't respond in the way I expect it to, because let's be honest, in my experience, the world never reacts exactly as I expect it to or want it to.
Right, precisely. You shared a couple of podcasts ago about our plan to build a home, or I guess you let the cat out of the bag about my plan to build a home is what I should say. And so it is a painstaking process, and it does have probably a few thousand variables about things that could go right and things that could go wrong. And we're so early in the process that I'm finding myself really having to be intentional about not letting myself go too far down any one mental pathway, because if contingency A doesn't happen, then let's move on to B, and if that doesn't happen, move on to C. And I can only plan so far, because again, the thing that's actually going to come about is probably something I'm not going to be prepared for anyway. And so is my attitude one of rigidity and kind of preparedness so that I can safeguard my heart, or is it one of kind of vulnerability and an openness so that what happens, what comes, it may catch me by surprise, but it doesn't tear me apart.
It doesn't tear you apart. Now, I want to come back to safeguard my heart, because I think that's a really interesting take on things. But what you said here also that I think is very important is that you're not going to be married to a specific outcome as far as a detail, but you're moving toward an overall arching goal.
Sure.
So there may be a little bit here of we might be doing a mixed metaphor. In other words, I'm prepared for anything versus everything, meaning that I'm moving towards a perceived overarching goal. There's obviously many paths to get there. And so maybe it's more about thinking about large scale, 100,000 foot stuff than detailed step by step by step. And maybe that's part of it. The other thing, though, that you said about safeguarding my heart, does that mean that your heart is going to receive a crushing blow if this particular outcome does not occur either on the way or at the end?
I think so. I think that's exactly what I mean. And so I would say I have to be prepared for the anything of this equation, because even though I'm going towards a goal, I have no guarantee that goal is going to be met.
That's right.
And the goal may be completely changed. If we cannot sell our home, if we cannot, build on this piece of property for some strange reason, there could be a myriad of reasons why this thing gets derailed. And if my heart is locked into we are building a house And if I can't see beyond that and I can't see any other possibilities, absolutely I'm going to be heartbroken. But if I stay open to the possibility that we may be steered in another direction, which could include staying in our present house, us selling our present house and having to find somewhere else to live altogether, there's a lot of things that could happen, right? If I have that openness to the anything, hopefully the heartache isn't so severe.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a very interesting thing, but it also leads to having a more curious mind than a more judgmental.
Yes.
This is what I'm expecting mind, because expectations are that's the definition of the first step towards disappointment or heartbreak, right? I mean,
having expectations.
Is having expectations, right? And so, but instead of lowering the bar, which I sometimes do on expectations, you can keep the bar high on the overall goal, but not worry so much about the details or the time frames. So, you have an expectation about a house that exists at the end of this process that has these kinds of attributes. You also have an expectation on the timing of that.
Sure.
And that it may be where you get in trouble. In other words, that outcome may happen, but it may happen 22 years from now versus 2 years from now.
Yeah.
And is that okay, right? Or is 4 okay versus 6 months? What is the timing of these things? My wife and I just went through this. We've been talking for years about moving from the current house we're in, which is where we're podcasting from here.
We'd lose the doors, though.
That's right. We'd have to take the doors, but the barn doors. But we've talked about this, and we've even done a few actions towards same. But then we keep coming back to, oh my God, look at the attributes in the neighborhood and the fact that it's paid off, and do we want to go back in debt? Blah 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 blah. Well, what we decided over the last week is, what? Let's just put a time frame goal in mind. Let's say that by the end of 2025, we're going to have a plan by which that we can then execute, or we have executed by the end of 2025, either building a new place of our own, or finding a different place to live. And so now that kind of gave us some peace. Instead of just kind of talking about it but not acting, but knowing that we can't act now, we said, okay, why don't we just set a time frame in the future by which we want to have a decision? And then we can kind of work backward from there toward today and say, okay, what do we want to do between now and then to make that a reality? And we both got a big sense of peace out of that. Yeah.
Well, if my deal falls apart, I got some land you can buy.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I think this is a really important conversation, because whether you find yourself in leadership in a company, or you're just leading yourself, or you're leading your family, if we are so married to an outcome or so married to a process that we set ourselves up for heartbreak and disappointment, it makes for a pretty miserable experience. And so how do we begin to ask some curious questions around the circumstances that we find ourselves in, to make sure that we are kind of in that fluid place, that more open to anything place? And I'm not suggesting that anything is okay. That's not where I'm going with this. But if we are prepared for the unexpected, or prepared that the outcome will be something that we hadn't planned towards, can that posture us for a more pleasant experience of life and the journey from point A to point B?
Yeah, and whatever success means to you, a more successful outcome ultimately. So I think we've talked about this on at least one podcast about the lean startup methodology, where you take an idea that you think is going to be really good, that solves a world pain that you think is great, this great invention that you have, and then you go out and you ask 100 customers that would be likely to use this, and you tell them about it. And then you ask them, would you buy this? And at what price point? And what attributes would it have? And all those kinds of things. And you develop those lists of questions as you go. But you learn so much that by definition, your initial idea, if you're listening to your customers, is going to be different.
Absolutely.
Than what you thought was going to be the outcome when you started. It's the biggest thing that we have to train scientists and engineers who come out of the national labs and who come out of these places who have these very good ideas, the kernel of a very good idea. But if they don't change it to what the world actually wants, then it's going to be a failure from the start. And so I think that's a great example of what we're talking about. If you get so married to the outcome that you double down, despite feedback, and they don't know what they're talking about, or you dismiss it and say, no, I know better, you can run yourself right off a cliff with a lot of resources being wasted, your own and other people's.
Absolutely. And how miserable a spot that when the thing that you were married to doesn't come to fruition, how miserable you are in just your outlook on life, looking back at the past amount of time or money that's been spent. And so can we be more curious on the journey to avoid that pitfall? And I think ultimately that's really what we're getting to today.
Well, and I think that's another one of those. I think I saw a meme recently about choose your hard, right? So, financial discipline is hard.
Yep.
Being in debt is hard.
Yep.
Choose your hard,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
and I think I really like that. And I think it's germane here, right?
Yeah.
It's like, having a specific focused goal and outcome and achieving it is hard. Holding it loosely and letting it evolve and being accepting of that, but maybe getting to another outcome is hard. Choose your hard, right? I mean, I think that's, but ultimately, and I think if we think about our own experiences, at least for me, I see it's almost like one of those things like, I can kind of have a sense with nobody's out there measuring all the data of people who start out with exactly what they want and take all the steps to get there, never wavering and always achieve it, versus the people who kind of hold the goal at a high level. Don't worry about the details, enjoy the process and adapt to change along the way. And whether they're more satisfied with the outcome, I don't know that we have statistics.
Sure.
But I would bet dollars to donuts that the latter process is better.
I will take your donut and I will add, I'll add just my own story and my own kind of journey of growth is I have been typically a pretty rigid person. I have been somebody that gets greatly disappointed when things get off track. I get greatly frustrated when my desired outcome doesn't come to pass. And it's taken a lot of time and a lot of introspection and a lot of internal work to kind of loosen the reins on that way of thinking for myself. And so I can tell you, I still struggle with it. It's not gone, but it's better than it was. And there is a freedom and a joy that is present in having the anything may happen approach, because I'm not holding so tight to something that I want and experiencing the devastation when that doesn't come to pass.
Yeah, boy, this is a good one. I think that staying curious and staying in the process and paying attention and those, and it doesn't mean that, I know that I'm not going to be perfect at this. I'm going to have an outcome.
Sure.
I'm going to have a desired result, and I'm going to kind of force function into that. And I'm going to be very positive about how, I think I can make this happen. I think I can make this happen. And I have a lot of background and data and experience that says I can make a lot of things happen. However, staying curious and then paying attention and using those resources for that, as opposed to just using my resources to achieve that goal, is probably going to work better. So how do we do that? How do we continuously ask? I think there's some curious questions we can ask.
Oh, for sure.
So for instance, why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to us? Why is this happening to my customer? Why is this happening to our production, to our rate of production, to our costs? Why is this happening in the market? I think there's a lot of questions we can ask about and keep ourselves open to what is the world telling us? What is our market telling us? What is my environment telling us? What is my family telling us? What is my spouse telling me? I think there's a lot of questions that we can ask and continuously, pay attention. It's like those 3 things that Jerry Seinfeld said. He says, bust your ass, work hard, pay attention, fall in love. And so I love that, because that pay attention is what we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the difference between being prepared for everything, and that assumes, specific outcomes that you can never be prepared for everything,
Yeah.
or being prepared for anything, which just stays flexible and continues to ask questions and stay curious.
Yes, for sure. I think this is a great place to introduce or reintroduce the 5 why methodology, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say the goal is to purchase a house,
Right.
and it has fallen apart, and you ask why.
Exactly.
You come to that first answer and you ask why again.
Yep.
And you come up with that answer and you keep 5 times, right, to kind of get to a root cause. You can have it on the negative side, but you can also have it on the curious and positive side. So let's say, for example, your goal was to get a master's degree in strategic forecasting. I guess that's a thing, I don't even know. And just things have happened. Things have derailed and you've not been able to accomplish that goal. So what about asking the 5 whys to get to the root of why was that the goal in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And have you met some of the objectives of that goal as you're examining your whys? So if the intention was, because I want to learn all about this field, I want to apply it to my workforce, I want to be a world changer, whatever, have you been able to tick off some of those boxes, even though the ultimate outcome wasn't achieved? You don't have the degree and the paper hanging on your wall. Were you still able to fulfill some of the reasons behind why you wanted that goal in the first place?
That's right. And a really good one to ask about goals is that a complete goal?
Yep.
Is that the right goal?
Mm-hmm.
How does achieving that goal serve me, or serve my family or my community or whatever unit I'm trying to serve? How does that goal serve that? Are there other ways to serve the myself, or my family, my work unit in the same way, or in a similar result? Are there other ways to do it, or to achieve the same reason through a different one of the different outcomes that might happen along the way?
Absolutely. So those 5 whys, those layers of whys, I think are a great place to start in the curious adventure for this topic. And then certainly, many of the questions that you brought up around, is that even the best goal in the first place? And was the desired outcome fulfilled in another path along the way? So really good things to think through. And I, again, always welcome your feedback. If you've got something that you'd like to chime in on this conversation, please do so. CuriosityNotJudgment.com is the website. Scroll down, there's a comment box there. You can send us a note. And of course, you can leave a comment right there on the YouTube channel. Always love to hear from you. And thanks to Jeff again. I forgot to tell you, we got another comment from Jeff, so we'll read that one and respond. But just really appreciate you guys engaging and being curious with us.
Take care.
Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.